Good afternoon. This is Cindy from CPSE, and welcome to today's sponsored webinar, Fire Operations and Accreditation Module, presented by FirstWatch. I am pleased to introduce Chris Carlson, FirstWatch Product Manager. Chris is a former paramedic, firefighter, and fire chief. In addition to his field experience, Chris has held a variety of leadership roles, including serving as a board member of the League of California Cities and California Fire Chiefs Association, Chief Operations Officer at TransCare, and Vice President of Xerox Corporation. Chris holds both an MBA and bachelor's degree from the University of Redlands and an Executive Fire Officer certification from the National Fire Academy. Joining Chris on today's webinar will be Terry Fitch, FirstWatch Sales Manager. And we'd like to ask you to contact Chris and Terry directly for additional information at the end, and be sure to visit their booth at the 2021 Excellence Conference, March 2nd through 5th at the Caribe Royale Hotel and Convention Center in Orlando, Florida. Thank you for attending, and now Terry will begin the webinar.
Well, thank you, Cindy, and hello, everyone. It sure is a pleasure to be on with you and be able to talk about some of our new products that are hitting the marketplace right now. But just before we get started, I was hoping to just share a couple of items with you. First of all, the webinar is being recorded, so that'll hopefully help you a little bit and not having to take so many notes, but a link will be emailed to you afterwards. The second thing is, in the control panel, the control window off to the right of your screen, you'll notice there are 3 PDFs that are loaded into that window. And those are just chock full of all kinds of FirstWatch information about, first of all, the products we're going to be showing today, as well as some of the other components of our suite that you may want to look at as well. And then lastly, if you have any questions, also in that control window, you can send us a message, and I'll be watching that closely. And then Chris will take a break here and there, and we'll address those questions as they're coming across. And then we'll also finish up at the end as we get more questions if they come through. So with that, we'll go ahead and get going. I am sitting here in a room 6 feet apart from Chris Carlson and another fellow by the name of Daniel Brown. With both of these guys being in here, they are the brains behind the product, and we're so excited to share this with you. We have prepared an in-depth overview of our fire operations and accreditation module, as Cindy was just saying. The acronym for that is FOAM, so that way we don't have to keep saying all the words. But Chris, you know, as we get started and we're taking a much deeper dive into the FOAM product, would you give just a little bit of history of why FirstWatch developed this module to begin with, and how we use the homogenized data and such with it?
Sure, Terry, thank you. First of all, before we get started, let me put out a sincere and heartfelt thank you to all of the folks here on the call today. We're sending out our best wishes and prayers and good thoughts that you and your family and your people stay safe and healthy through these very interesting times that we're going through. And having said that, thank you for carving out a little bit of time this morning to come and talk about FOAM and data analytics and data-driven and influenced organizations. So Terry asked a little bit about the history. I think we need to understand a little bit about FirstWatch in order to kind of understand the context of what we're doing. FirstWatch has been doing data stuff for 21, 22 years now. Our original DNA was in syndromic surveillance, public health analysis. And because of that, we bring to the table a little bit different and deeper view of operational, clinical, dispatch performance, essentially everything in the public safety field and the data that lies behind it. The reason I bring that up is there are many folks that are out there that perhaps are maybe a little bit newer to the data environment, and they'll say, "Oh, this is easy, right? We can do this. We'll capture all of your data, and you know, we can return it to you, and it's all good." Well, I got to tell you, I think many of you on the call today have experiences that understand it's not really that easy. People will say we can, you know, get your real-time data, and you know, you can have everything you need. Well, unfortunately, there's an inverse relationship between the latency of data and its accuracy, and a lot what we'll be talking about here with foam is how we have taken our experience and perspectives at FirstWatch and applied them to the ability to automate the data selection and the data criteria that we use, so that when you report out, either in terms of community transparency or to your labor groups or to your operational management, you know that the data that you are using is good, the results are consistent and good, and you maintain the credibility of yourselves as chief officers and leaders in the community as well as within your organization. So one of the advantages that FirstWatch brings to the table is that we just don't focus on the fire vertical. We do public health, we do public safety. As I said, we can bring some tools to syndromic surveillance that you don't typically find out there in the marketplace that allows you to do a much deeper dive. And I would encourage you that if you like some of the things you see, or you believe that there's a value that we can add in terms of meeting your particular needs as it relates to foam here, that you reach out to Terry or to I and get a little bit deeper understanding of some of the other aspects of data analysis and operational management that we can provide for you here at FirstWatch as we do things from everything from communication centers to clinical data protocol compliance to contract performance. Basically, if the data exists, we've got some experience to go ahead and help you out. And first and foremost, we like to view ourselves not really as vendors. We like to view ourselves as partners and consultants with you. So as you have what may be unique challenges in your organization, reaching out to us and valuing our experience that we have now with 500 plus clients across the USA and Canada and almost 300 major markets, over 140, 160 million data records that we've looked at over the years. Chances are we have an ability to share with you how other people are addressing similar issues or issues that may be related in one way, shape, or form. So in terms of that background, then getting back to Terry's original question, how did foam evolve? Well, as I said, we have literally hundreds of clients across the country. Many of our fire customers came to us and said, well, you guys are all about trying to automate those things which can be automated, and calling people's attention to those things that require the knowledge and perspective of a human view of things. So it seems to us, as we're interested now in accreditation and becoming more data influenced or data driven, that you should be able to help us out and clean up some of our data. And in our experience, our agencies that are interested in accreditation, or when they become accredited, have two universal reactions. The first one is, yay, we did it, great job team, we're so very happy. This is absolutely awesome culmination of a lot of work and sweat equity that we put into it, followed immediately by, oh no, now what do we do? Because it does become very labor intensive, it becomes very data intensive, and just keeping up and maintaining the accuracy and validity of the data that you use, not only for your accreditation process, but for the management of your systems over time becomes critically important. The other aspect of this is we had other agencies that came to us as they saw this module and said, we have no interest in accreditation, we can't afford it, city manager's not convinced, whatever. But you know what, this is really cool information. This really helps us with our management, our ability to filter things by essentially anything you want to filter by: stations, planning zones, battalions, districts, shifts, engines, rescue squads, ambulances, whatever. We basically can provide a semi-customized response to or a solution to whatever challenges that you may have in terms of trying to explain your operational and performance needs and impacts of changes, right? Closing engines, browning out engines, closing stations, browning out stations, adding new stations, annexing, contracting, et cetera, et cetera. And we'll spend a little bit of time talking about how we can provide you with some data that shows using quality improvement, process improvement techniques, how your changes, your solutions to the challenges that your agency faces are resulting in terms of true outcomes. So let me switch over real quick to the actual foam module itself, if that's okay with you, Terry.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, and hopefully my screen is showing what we want it to show. Everyone's seeing the ACR report? Okay. Yep. So those of you that are involved in the accreditation process will immediately recognize this. It's kind of a transitional piece. We had originally built this around version 9. We are now transitioning the format and some of the elements to what we understand to be what will ultimately be version 10. So you might see a little bit of kind of a blending of that. Probably the most interesting value-added piece of this is this header up here, right? So I've already referred to our ability to provide filters for you to look at things, not just in a ACR peer review accreditation method, but also an ability to look at it from a monthly operational standpoint or by stations, et cetera, et cetera. And within the foam module itself that we'll get to in just a second, there's a series of 10 reports, and we'll go through each of these that provides value, hopefully, to you and your operations, as well as some longitudinal views of how the data plays out. So let me take just a couple minutes and kind of go through some of the options on this ACR report. As you can see, currently, as those of you that are in accreditation know, you're looking at a 5-year comparison. So you have the ability to bring up 5 years or any period of time that you want to use. So if you wanted to use this as a monthly operations management tool, you can. If you have a different fiscal year, and we have multiple customers that have multiple fiscal years. We have one in May, we have one in June, obviously we have some in July, and we have many that are calendar months. So we have the ability to essentially provide any surveillance period, if I may borrow on our syndromic surveillance background, surveillance period for you to provide a comparison, as well as any custom dates, right? So if you're looking for a specific month or a specific 6-month period or whatever, have the ability to do that. I've brought up the 5-year comparison here to show. Equally important, we have the ability over here to include or exclude the current year, right? So one of the tyrannies of data is when you use current data, especially when you're using annual data. If you're in April or June, for example, obviously it's going to skew your results, right, because you've only got half a year of data. So you have the ability to include or exclude the current year's data, which is particularly important when you're using this to go with your technical advisor, your peer review committee, or your actual commission accreditation to be able to show full year's performance over time. We have the ability to, it provided you with the ability to sort by shift. If you have 4 shifts or 5 shifts, we obviously can add that. Sort by battalion, sort by or filter by your risk category, low, moderate, high, critical. Some agencies want to include their non-emergent calls. So typically one of the things that we do is, since this was again designed as an accreditation tool, is we wanted to automate out, or we do automate out, all those calls that are not necessarily relevant to represent the operational realities of your organization, right? So if your data set includes, test calls from your comm center or lockouts or public service or whatever it is that are truly non-emergent and you don't think it accurately represents what the performance of your organization in terms of emergency responses, you can include it or exclude it, and you see we have the ability to sort that out for you here as well. And then service area can be anything from stations. If you are in accreditation and you have planning zones, we can use planning zones, zip codes, census tracts, whatever it is that works for you, we can sort out by a variety of geographic areas. And when we get into mapping, this is where it begins to overlap and become important, right? So we can do geospatial representations of areas, whether it be, again, a planning zone or a council-matic district, or if you have contract areas, whatever it is that's important for you, we have the ability to provide that for you. So take a step back, in case you haven't caught on to this yet, everything we do is really highly customized. Yes, we have a foundation, right? Yes, we have a platform. But basically, one of our greatest values to you is we don't drop a box in your lap and say, here's your software, have a good time, we'll see you in a year. That's not what we're all about. As I indicated before, we're much more consultative. We want to provide solutions for you, and we sort out the other stuff later, basically. And that's just the way we do business. We're a little bit different organization. Almost everyone here comes from the public safety space. As Terry said, I'm a recovering fire chief, and hopefully someday I'll be able to talk in complete sentences again. We have, practicing paramedics, physicians, nurses. We've got a whole group of people across the entire spectrum of public safety that are here to, they feel your pain, right? They've kind of been there, probably experienced some of the stuff. So as it relates to technology, then we have this ability to help you develop technological solutions to some of your challenges. So anyway, geographic service areas, you have the ability to filter that. And then essentially the foam module is driven by the ACR and the components that are included in it, which are, measuring the operational performance, right? So again, those of you that are intimately involved in accreditation will recognize these alarm handling, turnout, travel, and total response times with ERF included within it. Again, you have the ability to define your ERFs. We don't go, automatically to NFPA standards or anything else. If you want us to use it, we certainly can, but you have the ability to define whatever works for your community. In version 10, you may or may not include benchmarks, so you have the ability to show that or not show it. And most importantly, you have the ability to define what those benchmarks are for your agency and for your communities. We break this also out by urban, rural, and then we also have a system category. This particular example only has urban within its agency, so it doesn't show rural or system, but obviously, if you do have rural aspects of your community or your agency, we include that for you. All of this is already calculated at the 90th percentile, so you don't have to do any wrestling or trying to figure out the various modalities of 90th percentile that the FESA may have. That's all taken care of for you. Each page represents a response category, right? So here we have fire suppression at the 90th percentile. We have hazmat, technical rescue, EMS. And if you have a special or unique response criterion within your agency, marina, protection, airports, whatever it may be, we obviously have the ability to add that to it, sort through your data, and come up with an output as it relates to this ACR. So as I indicated before, the foam module itself has a menu, if you will, of these 10 reports that we provide for you, which evolved out of this iterative process that we have with all of our customers. I would say probably 90% of everything we do here is really driven by specific identified needs that our customers have in the real world, right? We don't go off into a closet and say, wouldn't it be great? It's like, okay, here's a real world problem we're going to try to solve for you. So as we were developing this foam module, and as we started having more and more customers coming on board with it, we had a lot of wouldn't it be nice kind of things. And as we were thinking about it, we go, yeah, that would be nice. What can we do here? So the first of these is a very simple UHU, or unit hour utilization report, for those of you that aren't familiar with it. It's just a quick and kind of dirty view of how busy your units are based on the total number of hours that they are available or on duty, right? So again, taking this upper filter box here, we have the ability to sort by shift. In this particular case, we can sort by battalion. I'll just bring up the one battalion. You can sort and filter out by unit type. So again, if you have ambulances, trucks, special rescue, if you have ARF units, whatever, you can produce a report that is focused specifically on that. Again, you have the ability to create a unique surveillance period. So this is, I'm going to bring up last month, so think of this as kind of an end of month report of what we're doing. Again, you can sort by your risk classification. So we'll take out non-emergent because I don't really care what's going on there. I'm going to select all stations. It'll be limited by battalion. So this is all the stations in Battalion 1. So there you see them there. And then you can set the minimum number of calls, right? So when you have a large organization and you have one station that's running 2,000 calls a year and you have another station that's running 90, right? It presents just an ugly graphic. So you can set the minimum number of calls so that the only units that will display are those that have a number of calls over the set criteria to keep the visual display here meaningful for you as you go through. So it'll take a little minute. There we go. Comes up very quickly. Let me hide this. And so you see we're breaking this up by EMS, rescue units, transport units, however you want it to be represented, engines and trucks. And we can see here that, you know, for example, Rescue 108 has a UHU of basically 23%. So if it's on a 24-hour shift, 23% of those hours are spent committed to a call, right? So it's essentially from dispatch to available. We also have, it's not part of phone, but I'm sure Terry will be happy to talk to you, a unit workload report, which allows you to look at the various reasons why your units may be in or out of service, right? So again, depending on how you capture data, if you want to report on how much time we're spending on PT, how much time we're out of service for maintenance, how much time we're out of service for tower training, whatever the case may be, we have the ability to produce that for you. Again, to be clear, that's a report kind of outside of phone. But this gives you just a kind of a clear, high level, easily understandable by all people, including elected officials, just how busy, you know, a specific unit is. And where it becomes very cool is if you're adding a new, you know, transport unit, or you're adding a new engine, or you're doing, you know, peak staffing, surge staffing kind of thing, you can do a comparison and show, you know, how busy we are and what is the impact of adding a new resource or new people to our system. So that's UHU. We report out on transports. Again, this doesn't relate necessarily to anybody or agencies that only have ambulances, because as many of you do, I'm sure, you have cases, high criticality cases, where your paramedic or a firefighter drives an ambulance perhaps, or assists with a high criticality patient. And you want to gauge what the impact of that is on your overall delivery system. You know, how many calls are we sending, you know, essentially an engine to help the ambulance transport crews out with. So this just provides a very quick and dirty summary of, you know, again, based on station, how many calls they had total within the time period, how many transports originated from those calls, and how many times they did what we'll call a transport assist. Whatever vernacular you want to use, we can include in it. And so what's the overall impact? How often are we tying up trucks or engines in transport assist in our system, according to the various filter criteria that we have up here, right? Does that make sense, hopefully, to everybody? Terry, at this point, I can take a breath, grab a drink, and are there any questions that have come up?
Yeah, there's been one that popped up. If, you know, and it goes back to the ACR, is if CPSE were to change, add, or alter any of the rules or regulations of the ACR of the reports, how do we handle that as FirstWatch to the customers that are using phones?
Well, we stay current with CPSE CFAI. If and when they change, obviously there's going to be some degree of change when we go to the version 10 as an example. But if they were to do a midterm correction, it doesn't matter to us. Daniel Brown, who's sitting in the room with us, part of our team, is just great in terms of, either changing formats or changing entrance points to the report. So we would change it as soon as we became aware of it and confirm that that is in fact what the change is from CPSE.
Perfect.
That make sense?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Good.
So the other, moving down the list, we've already talked about the ACR under fire accreditation. It's easy for me to say. The time analysis graph is again, kind of a quick and dirty report. Again, we have the ability to sort by a variety of ways. So if you wanted to use this as a last month or end of month report, or last year, or whatever, you have the ability to do it. You can sort by shift. Again, sort by whatever battalions, if you have battalions. And I don't know if I've already said this, but if you have other organizational levels, if you have districts, for example, we can include districts in there as well. What we want to display, and I'll come back to this in a little bit, so what time segments we want to display, dispatch, turnout, and travel is what we're going to look at here. The risk level, so if we just want to look at high, we could do that. I'm going to take out non-emergent again. I'll pick all the stations again. It would be limited by Battalion 1. If we were to select all of the battalions, it would have all of the stations within the system. And again, we have a maximum this time on the number of minutes. The sole purpose of this is really to kind of keep the graphical presentation usable for you. Because again, you may have some rural stations that have a 32-minute response time, I'm making it up, and other urban stations that have a 3-minute response time. So you can imagine, what that graph would look like, right? I think we've all produced graphs in Excel or whatever that are just totally, out of sync and not in proportion because of the variance in the data that we have there. So I'll take out public assist from here, and then I will view the report. And
Actually, it runs pretty fast, doesn't it?
yeah, we're doing well. So again, and I just want to reiterate this, this is all done at the 90th percentile fractal performance rates, right? So essentially by station, right, what we have here is the ability to show the various response time segments that are listed in the ACR, right? So we have alarm processing time for station 1. We have the turnout time, again, at the 90th percentile for whatever time period we're looking at. The travel time, again, for this station. And then we created, again, based on our customer feedback, a category that we just basically call it unit performance station, right? So those are the things that can be impacted by the unit itself. In other words, travel time and turnout time. So if we didn't have to worry about what was going on within our call center, or we can only be concerned about managing, what our units can deal with, then that's the number we look at, right? So that's just independent of anything outside of the unit itself at 933. And then the overall total response time at the 90th percentile for all calls taken within that station for the time period we're looking at is 12 minutes and 55 seconds. Now, some of you are probably looking at it and going, well, wait a minute, if I add those things up, it doesn't come up to 12:55. And the reason for that is these are all independent variables, right? So we're looking at response time independent of turnout time, independent of overall response time, so that this is the 90th percentile performance for all calls within that station, right? Not just the addition of these particular numbers or segments that make it up. All right, the next report we have, this is one of our most favorite. Did I say that? Yeah. This is, many of our customers are very excited about this, and this, I guess, has the highest degree of utility is probably what I'm trying to say for day-to-day operations. So this is turnout time analysis. Coincidentally enough, it is an analysis of the turnout time of your various CRIs. We named it very appropriately. Again, we can set this up by whatever geographical level you want. In this particular instance, we're using station, but if you wanted to take it up a level to battalion, we've done that for some customers. Doing the drop down on this, it shows the units within that particular station. For this customer, they have different standards for day and night. We have the ability to total the number of calls that make up that universe, and again, reporting out what their turnout time is at the 90th percentile for those various performance criteria. Now, another feature that we have, if some of you have AVL or use wheels rolling as opposed to a manual data input, we can incorporate your AVL data. And for some of our customers, we've generated, as part of this report, the delta between the manual button push and the wheels rolling. So you can actually see, to what extent people are, kind of pushing the button, maybe playing the system, quote unquote, as opposed to, what's going on when, the wheels actually roll. Caution with that, you got to be very much aware of what your rules are for AVL activation and your modem activations and those kinds of things. But it nonetheless is a very interesting piece of information. And if the culture of your organization is set up around issues of, AVL as opposed to, your MODAC data push or whatever, then that's available for you. We can certainly use that and integrate it in here as well. Again, in terms of filtering here, you have the ability, you can do this by month, you can do this by date, et cetera, et cetera. You don't necessarily sort it out by station because that's essentially the product of the report and the output of the report that we're going to view. All right. Is there another question, Terry? Or? Okay, awesome. So aggregated district map, this is one area that we're actually spending a lot of time, effort, and money at enhancing. We are an ESRI partner, business partner. So what we are doing here is representing in a geospatial environment those things that are important to you for inclusion in, for example, your standards of cover document or your strategic plan. Again, very comprehensive and thorough ability to filter these for whatever purpose you may want to present, depending on who your audience is, et cetera, et cetera. Filter out non-emergent, again. Map to show service areas. So we talked a little bit about our ability to filter by various dimensions. So here's a perfect example. We're going to do this by service area, which is essentially planning zones for this particular agency, but we can come back and look at council wards, census tracts, fire districts, however we want to present that data per se. Get rid of this, and so bring up a map that you can cut and paste, you can export out and include for whatever purpose, right? I mean, again, this could be a response zone issue, it could be a council member that's not happy, it could be part of your standards of cover document, part of your strategic plan document, or it could be illustrated again to illustrate those changes that occur by changes in your system, whether it be, contract areas, annexations, closing stations, adding stations, truck companies. We've done studies for a couple of our customers about, the impact of station location and or trucks or ladders, depending upon what part of the country you're from, in various areas and what the impact is on their service areas and demand areas. So I think the critical point here is, without spending a lot of time on maps, is that we do have the ability to provide essentially anything we can get a map layer for, and if the data is sorted and or there's a data field that allows us to capture that particular geospatial element, then we have the ability to do that and represent that for you in a report. Okay. We call this the Incident Count and Response Performance Report. We lovingly call this our eye creeper report. To me, this is kind of the quintessential end of year, end of month, end of ship cycle report. It looks at responses and incidents. Again, we have a very comprehensive ability to sort this, so you have the ability to look at however you want to look at it. So again, I'll just take Battalion 1. You have the ability to determine what your dispatch goals are, and that's important because, frankly, there are many areas where you maybe don't meet what the national quote-unquote standards are. If you have a specific level of performance that your agency is currently meeting, you can enter that in there as well. Same thing for the unit performance goal in seconds. Have the ability to sort by whatever, or filter, I'm sorry, by whatever time period you want. Risk categories are available to be sorted. I'll select, again, all stations from Battalion 1. It'll bring up those. Again, same type of thing for the goal on turnouts, et cetera, et cetera. And when we view report, it basically just provides for you very quickly and simply, as I indicated before, the quintessential kind of end of month, end of year report. So a very high level summary of what are the types of incidents that you're responding to. Of those incidents, how many transports you generated. And the bottom part of this is essentially a breakout of the incidents into responses, right? So I'm sure most of this audience is familiar with the difference between incidents and responses, but in the FirstWatch world, you know, an incident is a specific demand for service, a call for service, and a response are, think of it as the unit movements around that call for service, right? So a structure fire could have, you know, fill in the blank, 7, 8, 11 responses to it. So a structure fire incident would have multiple incidents, as would a, you know, severe or high hazard EMS call, right? You'd probably have more than just a 2 or 3 person ambulance. You're probably gonna, you know, dispatch an engine or some supplemental staffing with that. Now up here where I said the performance goal is important, if you have, you can obviously enter the performance goal here, but if you don't want all these red marks here, right? The goals are the ones that determine, you know, whether you're meeting your standard or not. So if it's more important, for example, to you know, represent your performance against current standards or last year's ability, you can change those to whatever level you want to, so that you know, green is green and green is good and red is bad, and you can let it fall out where it may. We also then have, I mentioned earlier, the transport assist, so you can see what apparatus is most commonly associated with assisting a transport to a facility, and then transports by units. You know, who are your busiest transport units if you do such. And then the number of responses, so very similar to the incidents up here, just by individual unit. So who's doing what? And then at the bottom here, you can compare your total number of incidents for your total number of, total number of incidents to your total number of responses for whatever time period that you're looking at. And again, remember, you can filter by whatever time period you want up here. So that's our Acr report. The demand report is something that's essential, most probably essential to your standards of cover and or your strategic plan document. Again, we have the ability up here to include or not include whatever level of service you want. If you want to just look at this by shift or some other way, you clearly can do that. And then this is just essentially a color-coded demand analysis. So red is the most active, green is the least active. So if we were to put this on a radar graph, this probably wouldn't be a surprise to anybody on this call. You know, from essentially, you know, midnight to 5 in the morning, not a whole lot of either incidents or responses. So that's what we're looking at here. But then as the day picks up and we get into evening and rush hour and people going home, the call demand increases proportionally. So nothing terribly unusual here, but it is an interesting way to look at demands on your system, especially when you get to that point where you've got to start worrying about, you know, surge capacity or, you know, maybe flex units or doing something a little bit differently with respect to your management of your response system. Similarly, we have a station reliability report for you. Again, these are all automated, remember, so we can include whatever call types we want to look at. So if I just wanted to look at EMS, I could. If I just wanted to look at structure fires, I could. If I was in an urban wildland interface area, I could look at, you know, the interface areas, whatever it is that's important to you. Again, this degree of customization that is involved. We have 2 views of this, right? So the first one looks at from a first due basis, which basically just looks at it essentially from a station perspective and the resources from that station into the station's response district, right? So first arriving unit in the station 1, District 1 from Unit 1 occurs 84.73, call it 85% of the time, right? So this kind of tells you and tells your elected officials, to what extent are we available, for one, to respond within our first and district, and to what extent are we doing things outside of our district that you need to be aware of. We are also able, while these are just district stations, we also have customers that are running automatic aid or perhaps have a joint dispatch component that, and I'll show you that in just a second, that is outside the city. As a matter of fact, let me just go over there right now. So if I look at all responses, it will bring up this of which I speak. So if you have a neighboring jurisdiction, right, that you're always running auto aid into, oop, it's not there. Or you're surrounded, by a bigger city or whatever, and you're looking to see, who goes and who comes more often than not. We have customers that we've added, specific columns in that said, okay, so, station 104 is going to, North City X, 32% of the time, a third of its calls are going in terms of automatic aid, which, probably not sustainable, or maybe we need to have a talk about, what we're doing, or, maybe it fits perfectly with the regional system design you have. But this provides you with the data to allow you to make those determinations, right? So while the other one just looked at kind of generic resources assigned to the station, these look at the specific units within that station and where are they going primarily. In terms of their responses, right? So Medic Engine 1 here is going within Station 1's, planning zone / response area 98.37% of the time. So, pretty good. There are a few examples down here, I think, where, but it's really, it becomes very interesting, right? Where you have stations on borders, and this really presents a clear picture for elected officials and others within your community to see, how well are my stations located, how reliable, how available are they? And it presents a very good case for the addition of resources or stations or whatever when those numbers get completely out of whack. I'm going to come back here to excluded incidents in just a minute. I want to take you back to our other component of the foam module here. Which is our kind of longitudinal view of how are we doing with these various data sets, right? So as we go through this, I will call your attention to that these categories for these graphs are exactly the response categories that we're doing in the ACR, that we're looking at in the ACR, right? So there's alarm processing time, turnout time, travel time for the first unit on scene, total response time for the first unit on scene, the travel time for your ERF concentration, and total response time for your ERF concentration. So this is kind of your first initial response time, and this is your total ERF concentration over time. A couple of different ways to look at this. We also include, well, let me just kind of take you on a little bit of a tangent, but it's not a very big one. As I said, we learned a lot from our clinical work in terms of process improvement. And part of the tools that we've developed is the implementation of control charts as they relate to system variation over time and system improvement. One of the things that we learned in doing that is, and when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense, fire service delivery systems are pretty static. I mean, once you deliver, once you build a station, once you put an engine or your truck there, except in times of change, they're pretty, pretty static until a new development comes along, or until, like I said, you maybe contract with another agency, or you have a new big development, or you're faced, unfortunately, with browning out or closing stations or units. And that's when all of a sudden you begin to see some changes outside of this. So those of you that are familiar with statistical process control charts will recognize this. Essentially, these upper and lower limits are not based just purely on standard deviation, right? So these are arithmetically calculated based on essentially the standard deviation of the standard deviations without getting into too much math. And anything outside of these control limits are what are called special cause events, right? So those are elements that can be managed. Something bizarre happened there. Something changed in your system, something changed in the environment, maybe a new policy was implemented, who knows? But what this is telling us is something has occurred within our system that can be managed, right? So this is where process improvement methodologies come into play. And you can look at this and say, so what's going on there? I don't know. You have the ability to click on that, and it takes you from essentially a yearly summary to a daily summary, or I'm sorry, a monthly summary to a daily summary, right? So you can see, like right here, this tells me that there's probably some aberration in the data. We did, for whatever reason, we didn't receive data from these folks, or you didn't run any calls that day. I mean, you know, we have to dive into that to figure that out. But if you look at any one of these data points and then click on it, it brings up what we call essentially an event list, right? And you can sort this event list. So if you're looking at my overall response time, and I want to know, you know, what are the outliers, right? So I can sort by any of these column categories. You know, here I have a 5-minute and 10-second response time, which for this universe seems to be a little bit bigger than I would expect, greater than I expect. So I can then click on that link that is within this platform, within your screen, without having to go over to another screen, without having to sign in to your CAD or to your RMS or to any other element. You will bring up for you all of the data relevant to whatever that data source is, right? So this is, you know, a ProPhoenix, excuse me, incident report. This is de-identified, but you, with your authorities, would be able to get all of the de-identified information within here. And you have the ability then to basically look at whether it's an RMS field or a CAD field or an EPCR field, depending on what data source we are connected to or data sources that we are connected to. Have the ability to pull this up and look at it, and including the narratives, and see what exactly is going on. So you can do, you know, a quality assurance review. You can literally do this before the end of every shift. You can do it, you know, certainly at the end of the shift cycle, at the end of the month, you know, whatever works for you in terms of trying to manage this system more effectively. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody as we move through this. These charts can be represented by as a column. So if you don't like the line charts, you can represent them as a column chart. If you don't have an urban, well, if you didn't have a rural, it wouldn't be included in here anyway. But if you don't want to look at rural, you can remove that data set from the display. If you just want to see what your overall system is, you have the ability to do that. So just look at that. You can display this as a bar chart. I'm sorry if you prefer it to kind of go the other way. You know, again, based on date and time. These are all exportable as PDFs or PNG files. So again, if you want to export it for purposes of your standards of cover document or your end of month report or whatever reporting requirements that you have the ability to do that. And then all of these also have the ability to be displayed with the control chart parameters on them. And as I said before, where this becomes very important and critical and becomes a very useful tool is to have the ability to show the impact of changes within your system, right? So again, if you're threatened with brownouts or staff reductions or whatever, you have the ability to show that. Now, one very important element, especially for those of you in accreditation, one of the most labor-intensive efforts that you have through the accreditation process is explaining to your technical advisor and your peer review what calls did we exclude and why did we exclude them, right? So those of you that have been going through this for a while completely understand, you know, the challenges, and I don't want to say changes, but it's an area where there's been a lot more focus on. The old, oh, I'm going to take anything standard deviation, 2 or 3 standard deviations above the norm. Is not really acceptable anymore for reasons, unless you can show that there's a mathematical reason for that variation. So what we've done is provide what we call the exclusion tool, right? So click on exclusion tool, brings up all of the calls within that data set. We call them triggers, algorithms, if you will. within the foam criteria here, right? So again, you have the ability to sort these by however you want to sort them. So if we were to look at travel time, for example, you have the ability to bring up the highest value to the top, or the lowest value, as the case may be. So click again, it'll bring up the highest value. So you can see the outliers are those that are of greatest concern to you, right? So we have a travel time of 23 hours and 58 minutes. I'm guessing either that's a strike team or it's a bad set of data, right? Again, you have the ability here within one screen without having to sign out, sign back in, go to another platform, bring up the same type of summary call, right? So if we have RMS data, we have CAD data, we have EPCR data, you have the ability to just look at it and see, okay, so what happened on this particular call? And this looks like it's just going to be a bad data set, right? It looks like they didn't close out the call. So then you have the ability then to go over here. You, as the customer, can identify the outlier reasons that you most commonly find. So we will provide you with suggestions about what other people have utilized, but you know, you've seen one system, you've seen one system, right? Everybody has a unique view of the world and different things that impact their delivery of service. So you have the ability then, we'll work with you, you can create your own customized list here, but we can just say here, you know, got canceled en route, whatever the reason may be, never got on scene. As soon as you click yes, and I'm not going to, it removes that particular data and data set from the population and recalculates so that your outputs now reflect a data set that does not include that particular outlier. But the most important part of this is if we go back to the reports here, and this sometimes takes a while to load, and I apologize in advance. But if I go to previous year, and the only reason I'm doing that is because I know we have data, or this agency has data loaded from previous year. I'm not sure, but oh, look at that, lo and behold. All right, I was getting ready to apologize, I didn't even have to. So now you have a report that outlines the specific calls that were excluded, right? The relevant times that are associated with it, and the reason for exclusion. So now when you meet with your peer review committee or your technical advisor through the accreditation process, you can just go, well, here's my exclusions, and here's why we did them. And it will save, based on our experience, you a great deal of pain and suffering and sweat and blood and all sorts of nasty things. So it's a very important element of this, you know, especially as you're going through the accreditation process. One other thing that we do, we just added or in the process of adding, is kind of a help bar. So this is up here. When we do something new, we have so many customers now, we can't really reach out individually by phone and say, hey, this is a new feature, go check it out. Whenever you log in, when we have updates, you can just come up here and we'll have a new what's cool feature, right? So what have we changed? What's going on? How do you try it? And if you have questions, you know, call XYZ, you know, this phone number kind of thing. So there's that. I think, let me look at my colleagues here. Have I forgotten anything or?
I just wanted to say one thing on the exclusion tool, Chris, is that it works for the foam bundle of reports, not for other reports outside of the foam module.
Right, this is designed for,
for foam. I just want to make sure that we clarified that a little bit.
Yep. Oh, and so also in these excluded reports, as Daniel has pointed out, we have the hyperlink here available as well. So you can, again, just go look and provide for, again, the peer assessors, which this is designed for, the ability to get in and go, okay, well, you don't believe me, well, here it is. Right. So, same type of concept you see throughout. So you can see our goal here is to try to make this as, you know, one stop for you as possible. Ease of use. Once you get it on. Now, the one thing that I want to just, you know, I don't want to say it's cautionary tale, but because everything is so customized to you, right, the price that you pay for that is when we do the implementation. It takes a little bit of sweat equity with your staff and your data people to sit down with us to A, make sure that we're capturing the data that accurately reflects the performance of your system that you want us to capture, that we're, coding things the right way, that, your unit designators are, consistent with what we're looking at, that we're assigning, ambulances to EMS calls, whatever the case may be, just looking through kind of that transition from the data world to the real world and making sure that, that it's there. And this is usually done with a series of biweekly or weekly calls when the implementation is up, literally going through and saying, oh, well, here's the number we expected, and here's the number you got, what's going on. Daniel and or other members of our team will sit down with you and literally go line by line and say, oh, okay, well, here's what I think happened here. Let's do it. Let's try it. Yeah, okay, that did it. That's what I'm looking for, that type of thing. So it's the price that you pay for customization. It's not terribly onerous, but I didn't want to leave anyone the impression that this is just a magical box that we drop in your lap and, software works. And it kind of comes back to the issue that I started off talking about, that having done this for a long time, having been, I think, kind of on the forefront of, data integration and, data influencing in the fire service, even as far back as the 90s, the power of data is very, very powerful, but it's not simple, right? And at the end of the day, it's your credibility that is at stake here, right? So we want to get it right. We want to make sure it's reflecting what you think it is reflecting, and want to be in a position where, whether you're dealing with your elected officials, your community, or your union, you may disagree with, the data that goes into the report, but at the end of the day, everybody knows what that data is and they know what they're looking at. And that provides the consistency that you as leaders in the fire service need, because there's nothing worse in the world than providing a report to your mayor or to your city manager or your district council, and then having them read about another number that popped up, the next day in the newspaper because, maybe B shift reported things a little bit differently than A shift, that maybe did a little bit differently than C shift, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's one of the other great values in, having this homogenized data and having consistency across the board in it.
So as we're winding down, Chris, just a couple of questions popping up. One of them is, we currently use our fire records management system for our numbers. Do you integrate with most systems that are out there?
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, we not only do, fire and fire RMS, we do a lot of dispatch, we do a lot of EPCR clinical data, and we do public health data. We do law enforcement data. We have data source connections with, I think I'm safe in saying, every major vendor, right? And many, I'll call them second tier vendors for smaller, tier 2, tier 3 agencies. And unless, your brother Bill, kind of came up with it in your garage, we can integrate with them. And the reality is, if it exists in a database of any kind, we really do have the ability to go in and pluck the data out and provide these kinds of filters and reporting that we're able to do.
Perfect. So then we're just about out of time now. We're at 11:28. So I just wanted to bring up one more thing. I took it as a part of the summary. One of them is, with foam, as features and functions and new standard reports are added to the bundle, our customers that have the foam module will automatically be getting these updates, upgrades, the additional standardized reports that are part of the bundle. They'll just automatically get that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I'm not sure we're going to necessarily add additional reports, but as the reports change or modify, or if there are new unique things that happen, right? Yeah, we will update. It will probably be reflected in that feature that I showed earlier, which is the What's Cool feature. But in addition to that, I think that's an important part for you and your team, Terry, right? We have very active regional managers that reach out to take customer contact and very seriously. and are more concerned about really a relationship with a customer than selling something to the customer. So part of doing business with FirstWatch is, as I said, is different. It's just we're literally more of your partner. And I know that sounds all glitchy and salesy, but it's true. I mean, it really is. That we invest a lot in having relationships and making improvements based on those relationships, not just on, boom, here we go, this is what you got.
Perfect. Well, Cindy, I think we're at the bottom of the hour now. We all set?
Well, good. Thank you all for hosting, and thanks everybody for attending. And there's the screenshot, so you guys can take down Terry and Chris's information. And as they said, it is recorded, and later this afternoon, everybody will get an email with the link so they can download the recording for your agencies. Thank you guys so very, very much.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks, Cindy.